I was always very lively and, among my friends, but outside of that.
For 30 years, James Garner carried a secret that could have shattered his reputation. The world saw him as the fearless hero, the man bold enough to challenge powerful studios, to fight contracts that trapped actors, and to walk away rather than be controlled. He looked untouchable. But behind that unshakable confidence was a private battle he refused to name, a tragic struggle that followed him from childhood to Hollywood. For several decades, James Garner lived a double life, and now we finally understand why. An early life marked by struggles. James Garner was one of those rare actors who made everything look easy. For decades, the world saw a man who seemed completely at home in his own skin. Whether he was playing the reluctant gambler Brett Maverick or the private eye Jim Rockford, he had a natural charm that never felt rehearsed or forced. But the man audiences fell in love with was not born that way. The ease he projected was something he built over time, and he built it because he had to. Behind the smile and the easygoing manner was a childhood that gave him every reason to be guarded, suspicious, and angry. He was born James Scott Bumgarner on April 7, 1928, in a small Oklahoma town then called Denver, now part of Norman. His father, Weldon, was a carpenter and wallpaper hanger, while his mother, Mildred, was a homemaker. By all accounts, the first few years of his life were ordinary, even happy. But when James was 5 years old, his mother died suddenly. The official cause was listed as complications from a minor surgery, but the family always believed her heart simply gave out. She was only 33. What happened next set the pattern for the rest of his childhood. With no mother to raise them, James and his two older brothers, Jack and Charles, were sent to live with various relatives. For a time, they stayed with an aunt and uncle in the country, where the days were spent doing farm work and the nights were quiet. It was stable, but it was not permanent. Eventually, their father remarried, and the boys were brought back home. The new stepmother was cruel in ways that left deep marks. In his memoir, written late in life, Garner described her as abusive, though he did not dwell on the details. By the time he was a teenager, he had learned that home was not a safe place, that adults could not always be trusted, and that the best course of action was often to keep your head down and stay out of the way. He left as soon as he could. At 14, he was already working odd jobs around town. He pumped gas at a service station. He carried trays as a car hop at a local drive-in. He worked as a lifeguard at a public pool. He even did some modeling for Janssen swimsuits, a detail he would later mention with a mix of amusement and embarrassment. The money helped, but more than that, the work kept him out of the house. He dropped out of Norman High School before graduating. School had never been a priority, and with tensions at home growing worse, staying felt pointless. He bounced around for a while, taking whatever work he could find, until the war gave him a way out. At 16, he lied about his age and joined the Merchant Marine. It was 1944, and the world was still at war. He spent the next 2 years crossing the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, hauling cargo and trying to stay out of trouble. When the war ended, he came home, but home had not changed. His stepmother was still there, and the old tensions quickly resurfaced. He lasted a few months before enlisting again, this time in the regular army. It was 1950, and the United States was sending troops to Korea. Garner ended up with the 5th Regimental Combat Team, 24th Infantry Division, as a rifleman on the front lines. Korea was brutal. It was a war fought in extreme cold and extreme heat, often in terrain so rugged that supply lines could not keep up. Garner served as a scout, which meant he was often sent ahead of his unit to locate enemy positions. It was dangerous work, and he was good at it. He was wounded twice, once by mortar fire and once by small arms. Both times, he returned to his unit after treatment. He received 2 Purple Hearts, the Combat Infantryman Badge, and a handful of other medals that he rarely talked about in later years. When he came back from Korea, he was 24 years old. He had survived a broken childhood, a brutal stepmother, and one of the toughest wars of the 20th century. He had also learned something about himself. He could endure almost anything. He just was not sure what to do next. He tried college for a while, enrolling at the University of Oklahoma under the GI Bill. But he had been out of school for years, and sitting in classrooms felt wrong. He lasted 1 semester. After that, he drifted again, taking odd jobs and living in cheap apartments, until a chance encounter in Los Angeles changed everything. A friend from Oklahoma had moved to California and found work as an extra in a Broadway play that had transferred to the coast. The play was The Caine Mutiny Court-Martial, directed by the legendary actor Charles Laughton. The friend told Garner they needed bodies to fill out the courtroom scenes, men who could sit quietly and look like soldiers. Garner showed up, got the job, and spent several weeks sitting in the back of a stage while some of the finest actors of the era performed in front of him. He watched Henry Fonda night after night. He watched how Fonda moved, how he delivered his lines without seeming to deliver them, and how he commanded attention without raising his voice. Garner had never studied acting. He had never even thought about acting. But watching Fonda, he realized something. What Fonda was doing did not look like performing. It looked natural. But that realization did not lead directly to stardom. There were years of small parts, bit roles, and near misses before anything clicked. But the seed was planted. By the mid-1950s, he had changed his name from Bumgarner to Garner, signed a contract with Warner Brothers, and started appearing in television dramas and B-movies. He was learning the craft slowly, the same way he had learned everything else, by watching, by listening, and by trusting his instincts. Then, in 1957, a show called Maverick came along. It was a Western, but unlike any Western that had come before. The hero, Brett Maverick, was a gambler who preferred wit to violence and often found himself in trouble simply because he was too lazy to avoid it. The network wanted a traditional cowboy. Garner gave them something else. He played Maverick as a man who had seen enough of the world to know that rushing into things was a good way to get killed. He was skeptical, self-deprecating, and utterly believable. Audiences loved him, and within months, he was one of the most famous people in America. But fame did not erase the past. It only gave him more to push against. The struggles he had survived as a child and a young man did not disappear when the cameras started rolling. They just went underground, where they would stay for the next 30 years. This time, it was not just a difficult childhood. It was a war he fought long after the cameras stopped rolling. A war with the very industry that made him a star. James Garner's battle with Hollywood. By the time Maverick made him a star, James Garner was already 30 years old. He had lived through enough to know that things were not always what they seemed. So when Hollywood came calling with contracts and promises, he paid attention. He read the fine print, and what he found there would set the tone for the next 3 decades of his professional life. The role of Brett Maverick fit him like a good leather glove. But there was a problem Garner had not anticipated. The studios wanted more of the same character. More charming rogues and reluctant heroes who smiled their way through danger. And Garner gave it to them, at first, because that was what he was hired to do. But as the years went on, he began to feel the walls closing in. Every script that came across his desk seemed to feature the same character with a different name. He was being typecast, and typecasting, for an actor who valued authenticity, was a kind of prison. He wanted to play complicated men. He wanted roles with darkness and depth, characters who were not simply likable, but were interesting because of their flaws. The studios heard him out, nodded politely, and sent him another script about a charming gambler. They had found something that worked, and they had no interest in fixing it. The frustration simmered for years. Garner took what he could get and tried to find small moments of variety within the roles he was given. But by 1960, the pressure had built to a breaking point. That year, a writer's strike shut down production on Maverick. Warner Brothers responded by suspending Garner, invoking a clause in his contract that allowed them to stop paying him while the strike continued. Garner saw the move for what it was, an attempt to squeeze him financially until he agreed to extend his contract on their terms. And so, he did something almost unheard of at the time. He sued them. The lawsuit was not just about money. It was about the fundamental unfairness of a system that treated actors as property rather than partners. Garner argued that the studio could not suspend him for a strike they had nothing to do with, and more importantly, that the 7-year contract they had locked him into was essentially a form of indentured servitude. The case went to court, and Garner won. The decision sent shockwaves through the industry. For the first time, actors had legal grounds to challenge the old studio system, and it was James Garner, the easygoing cowboy, who had opened the door. But winning a lawsuit against a major studio comes with consequences. For several years after the Warner Brothers fight, Garner found himself blacklisted in certain corners of Hollywood. The work did not dry up completely, but the offers were fewer and the roles smaller. He kept working, appearing in films and television shows that ranged from solid to forgettable, waiting for the moment when the industry would forgive him for standing up for himself. That moment came in the early 1970s when he was offered the role of Jim Rockford in a new television series called The Rockford Files. The character was another reluctant hero, a private investigator who worked out of a trailer and preferred talking his way out of trouble to throwing punches. On paper, it looked like more of the same. But Garner saw something different. Rockford was a man trying to get by in a world that kept pushing him down. He was broke, cynical, and tired. But he kept going because quitting was not an option. Garner understood that man completely. The Rockford Files became one of the most acclaimed shows of the decade. Garner won an Emmy for his performance, and the series developed a loyal following that persists to this day. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. The show demanded constant physical work. Garner performed many of his own stunts, including the famous car sequences where Rockford would spin his Firebird into dramatic reversals. It made for great television, but it wrecked his body. Over the course of the series, Garner was injured repeatedly. He tore cartilage in his knees, he injured his back, and he even developed arthritis in his joints that would trouble him for the rest of his life. By the time the show ended in 1980, he was in constant pain and facing a mountain of medical bills. Then came the final insult. Universal Studios, which produced The Rockford Files, informed Garner that the show had lost $9 million. Under the terms of his contract, that meant he was owed nothing beyond his base salary. Garner knew this could not be true. The show had been a hit for years. It ran in syndication around the world. There was no way it had lost money. He asked to see the books. Universal refused. So he did what he had done 20 years earlier with Warner Brothers. He sued. The battle dragged on for 9 years. Garner's lawyers dug into Universal's accounting practices and found something that would become known across the industry as creative accounting. The studio had indeed lost money on the Rockford Files, according to their ledgers, because they had charged the show for everything they could think of: overhead costs, production fees, distribution charges. They had structured their books so that even a successful show could be made to look unprofitable on paper, allowing them to keep the profits for themselves while telling the talent there was nothing left to share. Garner's lawsuit did not just seek his own money, it exposed the entire system. Eventually, Universal agreed to settle out of court. The terms were confidential, but the impact was not. After the Garner case, studios became far more cautious about how they structured their deals. The fight cost Garner years of his life and millions in legal fees, and added stress to a body already broken by stunts and long hours. Through all of this, there was one person who stood by him. Her name was Lois Clark, the woman he married in 1956, just 2 weeks after they met. Theirs was not a Hollywood romance in the usual sense. It was something far stronger. And it is the reason James Garner survived everything the industry threw at him. The woman who kept James Garner grounded. In the summer of 1956, a friend invited James Garner to a party. He almost did not go because he was tired, and parties were not really his style. But something made him change his mind. At the party, he noticed a woman across the room. Her name was Lois Josephine Clark. She was not an actress and had no connection to the entertainment industry. She was just a young woman from California, pretty in an unpretentious way, talking with friends and laughing at something someone had said. Garner later recalled that he walked over and introduced himself without really thinking about it. He just knew he had to meet her. They talked for hours that night. The conversation moved easily from one subject to another. Garner discovered that Lois was 7 years older than him, a fact that did not matter in the slightest. He learned that she had been married before and had a young daughter named Kimberly. That did not matter either. What mattered was the way she made him feel. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone saw him clearly, not the image he projected, but the person underneath. 2 weeks later, on August 17, 1956, they got married. To outsiders, the speed of the marriage seemed reckless. Friends warned him to slow down. Family members expressed doubts. Lois's own family was not thrilled that their daughter had married an actor, and an unknown one at that, after knowing him for 14 days. But that decision would prove to be the most important one of their life. In the years that followed, as Maverick made Garner famous and Hollywood came calling with all its temptations and traps, Lois remained the fixed point in a spinning world. She preferred the quiet life, the life away from cameras and flashbulbs. And Garner preferred it too, because being with her meant being himself. They raised 2 daughters together. Kimberly, Lois's daughter from her first marriage, was adopted by Garner and became his own in every way that mattered. In 1958, they had a second daughter, Greta, whom everyone called Gigi. Garner threw himself into fatherhood with the same determination he brought to everything else. In an industry where actors often treated family as an afterthought, Garner made his the center of everything. This did not always sit well with Hollywood. There were producers who wanted him at parties, directors who wanted him at events, and studio executives who expected him to play the game. Garner declined more often than he accepted. He had seen what the Hollywood social scene did to marriages, and he had no interest in becoming another statistic. The marriage was not without its challenges. Garner's fame brought pressures that would have broken lesser relationships. There were rumors over the years, as there always are about famous men, but Garner never gave them any attention. Garner often said in interviews that Lois was the reason he survived Hollywood. Without her, he might have been consumed by the industry's demands, lost in the endless cycle of work and pressure and expectation. With her, he had a place to retreat, a sanctuary where he was not James Garner the star, but just Jim, the guy who liked to cook dinner and watch television and spend time with his family. Their marriage lasted 58 years. Lois outlived him by a few years, passing away in 2021. By then, their love story had become the stuff of Hollywood legend. But time catches up with everyone, even the lucky ones. In his later years, Garner's body began to fail in ways that could no longer be ignored. The injuries from his past and the simple process of getting older converged in ways that would test him as surely as any studio lawsuit ever had. The tragic decline of James Garner. For most of his life, James Garner seemed indestructible. He had survived a brutal childhood, a war, and decades of fighting with Hollywood studios. On screen, he always got back up. But bodies keep score, and by the time he reached his 80s, the score was catching up with him. The heart problems had started years earlier. In 1988, at age 60, Garner underwent quintuple bypass surgery. 5 blockages, 5 arteries rerouted. It was a serious procedure, the kind that forces a person to confront their own mortality. Garner recovered and returned to work, but the surgery was a warning he could not ignore. His heart was not as strong as it had once been. For the next 20 years, he managed. He slowed down, took fewer roles, and spent more time at home with Lois. But the underlying problems never went away. His arthritis worsened. His knees, already damaged by war and stunts, reached the point where walking was a challenge. He used a cane when he went out, and eventually a scooter for longer distances. Then, in May 2008, everything changed. Garner suffered a massive stroke at his home in Brentwood. He was 80 years old. The stroke was severe enough to starve his brain of oxygen for a period of time, leaving him with lasting complications. He survived, but he was not the same afterward. His mobility, already limited, became more restricted, and his speech was affected. The public did not see much of him after that. Garner retreated into private life, surrounded by Lois and his daughters and a small circle of close friends. He made a few appearances over the next 6 years, usually in a wheelchair, always with Lois nearby. On July 19, 2014, James Garner died of a heart attack at his home in Los Angeles. He was 86 years old. The news spread quickly. Television networks interrupted programming to announce it. Social media filled with tributes from fans and fellow actors. The tributes all said the same thing in different ways. He was one of the good ones, a man who stayed true to himself in an industry that rewarded the opposite. But even as the tributes mounted, there was a sense among those who knew him best that the full story had not been told. James Garner had spent decades projecting an image of easygoing calm, but the man behind that image was more complicated than anyone knew. He had carried something with him through all those years, something he rarely discussed, something that shaped him in ways even Lois could not fully understand. For years, James Garner hid it from the world. Now, finally, we know why. The double life of James Garner. For 60 years, audiences watched James Garner and saw a man at peace with himself. He moved through scenes with an ease that suggested he had never known a moment of self-doubt. His characters were comfortable in their own skin, quick with a joke, and slow to take anything too seriously. But what the public did not see was the war he fought when the cameras stopped rolling. The truth was, James Garner lived with depression for most of his adult life. He did not talk about it. In his era, men did not talk about such things, and Hollywood stars certainly did not. Depression was something you handled privately, if you handled it at all. You did not admit to weakness, so Garner hid it. For several decades, He hid it behind the smile and the wit and the effortless charm. Only a handful of people knew what it cost him to walk onto a set some days, to face the cameras, and to be the man everyone expected him to be. The roots of his depression ran deep. They went back to Oklahoma, to the childhood that taught him the world was not safe. Losing his mother at 5. Living with relatives who meant well, but were not his parents. Coming home to a stepmother whose cruelty left scars that never fully healed. By the time he was a teenager, Garner had learned that the best way to survive was to keep things inside. Korea added another layer. He saw things there that no one should see and did things that had to be done, because that was what the situation required. When he came home, he carried all of it with him, locked away in a place he did not know how to access. The nightmares came and went. The memories surfaced at odd moments. He learned to push them down and keep going. Hollywood made it worse. The pressure of performing and the knowledge that millions of people were watching and judging fed something dark inside him. There were days when getting out of bed felt impossible. There were periods when the weight of everything pressed down so heavily that he could barely function. He took breaks from acting when it got too bad, disappearing from public view until he could gather himself again. Stage fright was part of it. This might surprise people who watched him on screen. But Garner was terrified before every performance. The fear never went away. He simply learned to work through it, to channel the anxiety into something useful. He did not seek therapy in any formal sense. Instead, he developed his own coping mechanisms. He worked. When the darkness closed in, he lost himself in roles, in characters who were not him, and in worlds where he could be someone else for a while. He went home to Lois, who knew what he was dealing with even when he could not put words to it. Humor was his greatest weapon. Garner could deflect almost anything with a well-timed joke or a self-deprecating comment. People laughed and moved on, never realizing that the joke was a shield, that the humor was a way of keeping them at a safe distance. He had learned that trick as a boy in Oklahoma, and it served him well for the rest of his life. In 2011, 3 years before his death, Garner published his memoir, The Garner Files. In its pages, he finally opened up about the depression that had shadowed him for decades. He did not dwell on it or seek sympathy. He simply stated the facts, the way he had stated everything else in the book, with clarity and honesty. The revelation surprised many fans. They had watched and loved him for so long, yet never suspected the pain beneath the surface. By speaking openly at the end of his life, Garner did something important. He helped normalize a conversation that had been hidden for too long. If James Garner could struggle with depression, if he could fight that battle while building one of the most successful careers in Hollywood history, then maybe others could find the courage to face their own struggles. Maybe the shame did not have to be part of it. He never wanted to be a spokesman for mental health. But by telling the truth about his own life, he became one anyway. For 30 years, James Garner hid a part of himself from the world. He hid it because he thought he had to, because the industry demanded a certain image, and because his generation taught him that some things were not discussed. But in the end, he let the world see who he really was. Not just the charming hero, not just the reluctant gambler, the whole man with all his cracks and scars. And the world loved him anyway, maybe even more. What's your favorite memory of James Garner? Drop your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.